Cea de-a doua Conferință Globală de Sănătate și Stil de Viață, organizată de Biserica Adventistă de Ziua 7 la nivel mondial, a avut loc la Geneva la începutul lunii iulie. Având ca temă bolile cronice netransmisibile, conferința a adunat cadre medicale din întreaga lume, educatori pentru sănătate, pastori și mulți tineri studenți. Principalul interes al participanților a fost stilul de viață sănătos, promovat de Biserica Adventistă de Ziua 7. Bolile civilizației pot fi prevenite sau ameliorate adoptând obiceiuri sanogene, precum dieta echilibrată, exercițiul fizic și cel emoțional. Legătura dintre spiritualitate și sănătate a fost de asemenea subliniată de toți vorbitorii. Omul este o ființă complexă și trebuie privit ca un întreg: trup, minte, emoții, legătură cu Dumnezeu. O categorie aparte de afecțiuni care înregistrează creșteri semnificative în ultimii 10 de ani sunt bolile psihice. În minutele următoare vom afla care sunt cele mai frecvente probleme de sănătate mentală și ce putem face fiecare dintre noi, alături de cadrele medicale, pentru a ajuta pe cei din ce în ce mai numeroși care au aceste suferințe, adesea invizibile.
We are whole beings. We can't separate the body from the mind or the spiritual. It's all in one. That's the way we were created. The way we think affects the way our body works. The way our body works affects the way we think. We're just so beautifully made. And I believe that over all of these, the mind and the body, there is the direct effect of the Holy Spirit in us.
Mental disorders are very varied, so there are various types of mental disorders. Some of the common mental disorders everybody has heard about, for example, depression. It's a mental state where a person feels sadness for a much longer time than the usual, and a sadness that is much higher in intensity than the normal emotions of sadness that we undergo each day. There could also be anxiety. But there are other severe mental disorders like psychosis, schizophrenia, as well as bipolar illnesses, which are more serious. There are also other mental illnesses, for example, personality disorders, and also drug and alcohol dependence, which are also identified as mental disorders. So these are some of the common varieties of mental disorders that they are there. But I would also like to point out that mental disorders are very common. As opposed to some of the physical disorders, mental disorders are very, very common, not often realized. As many as 1 in 4 families will have a mental disorders during some part of the person's lives. So all of us are touched by mental disorders, either in ourselves or in the family or amongst friends. So they are very common and they occur in all parts of the world. They are present in all countries and in all strata of society: rich people, poor people, men, women, children, old people. Mental illnesses can affect anybody.
The Bible does say that a merry heart does good like a medicine. And gratitude is one of the things that produces a happy disposition. So for some people who are mildly depressed, a faith in God, a renewed sense of His guidance, a cheerful disposition, a heart of thankfulness is really helpful. But there are other people who do not have mild forms of discouragement. They don't have mild forms of depression. There are other people who sink very deep into the depths of depression. And there are some people that have mental illness. We as Christians look at mental illness as we do other illnesses, that they are illnesses. There can be some medical treatment for them. There can be some a mental and emotional treatment for them. But we should look at people with a mental illness similar to we do as people that have a heart disease, that may have cancer, that may have diabetes. We don't shun those people. We don't say to those people, well, look, there's something wrong with you. There are times that a person develops a mental illness, not because of their choices, but because of degenerative genetic issues in their brain.
Organismul uman este un întreg. Avem nevoie de o minte sănătoasă într-un corp sănătos. Dacă o persoană suferă de o boală fizică și viața lui psihoemoțională este afectată, la fel, o boală psihică netratată va produce o degradare a organismului în ansamblu.
Many physical illnesses predispose people to mental disorders. For example, if there is a chronic disabling illness like arthritis or a cancer which is life-threatening, people become depressed and it can go on to become a disease of depression. So as many as 30% people with cancers or people after a stroke or people after a heart illness can suffer from depression, and those are commonly co-associated with physical disorders. There are also some neurological disorders, for example dementia, which are diagnosed as neurological but also as a mental disorder. So there is a very close connection between physical disorders and mental disorders.
Well, there's a greater realization too in terms of mental health issues in our communities. In fact, the prevalence of mental health illness, principally depression, might range from 20% to as much as 50-60% in some communities. It is very prevalent. And it is even more prevalent among those who have non-communicable diseases, which we often forget about actually. Clearly, having a non-communicable disease, having a chronic disorder can make one depressed. And is also, to a lesser extent, the reverse. Sometimes with depression, people do develop some of the non-communicable diseases. So there's that association. There are links to stress and heart attacks. There are links to stress and diabetes, not well documented, but this is known. So there are relationships. And of course, having long-term need for care, etc., can make individuals depressed.
Gestionarea afecțiunilor psihice, de obicei realizată în spitalele de psihiatrie, trebuie să devină o sarcină a tuturor cadrelor medicale, de la asistentă, asistent social, medic de familie sau medic-psihiatru. Ei trebuie să identifice precoce și rapid problemele de sănătate mentală și să ofere, după caz, suport și tratament.
Mental disorders have been ignored for a very long time. So society in general and healthcare systems in particular have not responded to the need for mental disorders. But now perhaps we are waking up and more resources are being assigned. The Mental Health Action Plan of the WHO, passed in 2013 by all the health ministers of the member states of WHO, is a good example. There is a clear political commitment to assign more resources to mental disorders and to train healthcare providers much better to identify and treat people with mental disorders. We believe in WHO that mental disorders should be identified and treated by all healthcare providers, whether it's a community health worker, whether it's a nurse, it's a doctor or a specialist. They should all be trained in early identification and treatment of mental disorders, and that's not happening now. So that's the plan that we need to implement to make sure that people who require mental health care can receive it in all healthcare facilities rather than to go to a mental hospital.
I think around the world today, there is a very large negative stigma about mental illness. Now, we are making some progress, and in some ways and in some places, the stigma is not as big a problem as it used to be, but there still is a stigma, and there still is a lot of work for us to realize that mental illness is a real disease. Research reveals that mentally ill persons, let me take the case of depression. Major depression is as disabling, leads to a higher level of disability, the ability of an individual to function and complete their day-to-day tasks, than heart disease or diabetes or arthritis. So mental illness is not just something in the minds of individuals. It's a real illness that can have negative consequences for health. And just as someone who has a heart problem or who has cancer believes that they are really sick and they need to go to a trained medical doctor to get help to treat their heart disease or to treat their cancer, so someone who has a mental health illness also needs to get expertise and trained knowledge and expertise to help them deal with their health problem. The good news is that we have learned a lot over the last several decades, and mental illness is not a death sentence. There are treatments available, there are psychosocial interventions available, there are drug treatments available for many people who are severely ill. So it is possible for people with mental illness to recover.
Stigmatizarea bolnavilor psihic este o problemă la care societatea încă mai trebuie să lucreze. Teama, discriminarea și stereotipurile îngreunează vindecarea și răpesc acestor pacienți dreptul la o viață decentă.
Historically, most societies treated people with mental disorders with the stigma and discrimination. They built a mental hospital outside the main city and put people there. The objective was less to look after those people, but more to segregate them from the society. And that has been the historical pattern in all countries, actually.
One of the most important things we need to do to help remove the stigma is for people the rest of society, to meet real people who have had mental illness, who can talk about the pain and the reality of being mentally ill, but who can also show that it's possible to recover, it's possible to live a successful life, it's possible to hold a job, to maintain good relationships with others, even after someone had a history of mental illness. So when people can see real examples of first the reality, the pain and the illness, but also of the recovery and the success, that can be a giant step forward in helping people to really understand the facts about mental illness and not let many of the wrong ideas and the stereotypes shape how they view someone who is mentally ill.
Some countries have changed. They have abolished mental hospitals. They are integrating care within the community and encouraging people to live in the community. We believe in WHO, that's the way to go. Although different countries and different communities are at various levels in doing that. Some countries still, the stigma is so high that either people don't identify themselves as having mental disorder, or if they do, they are segregated from society. They have no rights. Often they are incarcerated in mental hospitals, or even within their family. They're not allowed to go out. They're not able to mix socially. They're not able to go to schools or work. And those are human rights abuses that should be stopped right now. There is no reason that these human rights abuses need to continue.
The concern about mental health is a huge one, and we still stigmatize people if they have depression in particular, anxiety, things like that is a problem. We have a behavioral medicine center, we call it Loma, a psychiatric hospital, one of the largest ones around. We've just built an outpatient facility next to it we call the Behavioral Health Institute. So we try to train psychiatrists, physicians with specialty training, psychologists, social workers, marriage and family counseling, psychiatric nurses. We train them all together so they understand each other and how to refer back and forth with them. But it is a very difficult road to go down. These are fundamental issues, and trying to solve them by medicines typically, I mean, you can help, but these are longer term situations. Trying to get them to be accepted by others is a challenge. I mean, so many times you need mental health needs to be with the family at the very least, and sometimes even an extended family, so that they all get involved. The whole issue of codependency and how a person relates to each other is critically important.
Este societatea pregătită să primească în mijlocul ei oamenii cu probleme de sănătate mentală? În condițiile în care 3 din 4 oameni suferă sau vor suferi de o astfel de afecțiune, este nevoie de legi și reguli noi pentru integrarea socială a bolnavilor psihic. Este însă nevoie și de o schimbare a atitudinii oamenilor față de această patologie.
We require action on both fronts. One is a legal infrastructure to make sure that discrimination is not allowed by law. So people have their rights, and people with mental disorders have equal rights compared to the people who have no mental disorders. And that should be taken by law. However, there is also a reason to educate and inform society so that they can follow the law and actually implement it and change their mental attitude to be able to be receiving people with mental disorders in their families more readily, more quickly, and more comprehensively. So both actions are required, changing the law as well as changing the mindset of people. Our recommendation to communities and countries is involve people with mental disorders in all activities to the extent that they can take part. In fact, there should be a proactive approach to make them take part in all activities, whether they are social, whether they are economical or educational. And that's the way to go. Some societies, of course, are not ready for that, but that's no excuse. We should start now.
Biserica din care face parte persoana cu probleme de sănătate mentală trebuie să devină un grup de suport și un mediu prietenos, cald, care să contribuie la ameliorarea problemelor medicale ale pacientului.
We believe that mental disorders is a business for everybody. There is a role for health services, but there is also a role for society, including religious organizations, whether it's the church, whether it's the mosque, whether it's the temple, or any other religion that there is, because many people take initial help from the religious groups because they don't want to go to mental health facilities. They often contact people that they know well, which in many cases is the religious person. And religious people should have some basic understanding of mental disorders so that they can not only advise but also channel people who need mental health care to the right places. And that's something that every religious organization should be willing to undertake, and that will really help a lot in decreasing the problems that people face in receiving help and sustaining with that.
In terms of the role of the church and other religious organizations, we have a very clear perspective that no one organization or any health authority can reverse the magnitude of the non-communicable disease epidemic. This has to require collaboration between different partners, and therefore we term it a multi-sectoral approach where players include the health system, include civil society, academia, governments, government agencies, foundations, private institutions, and of course the church and religious organizations are part of this multi-sectoral approach and strategy. So therefore the church has a very clear role to play in terms of being a collaborator and being a leader in tackling non-communicable diseases. So definitely a role for the Adventist Church.
Aici la Geneva s-a pus mult accent pe sănătatea mentală, în mod special pe sănătatea emoțională, ceea ce s-a cam neglijat în ultimii ani, atât în biserică, în biserici, cât și pentru populația largă. Așa că mi-aș dori ca în România să punem accent mai mult pe acest aspect, să avem cluburi de sănătate care să trateze problema, atât din punct de vedere preventiv, cât și centre sau locuri în care persoanele care au deja probleme, cum ar fi cu depresia, o boală foarte răspândită astăzi, să poată găsi tratament, consiliere pe această problemă făcută de către profesioniști. România are nevoie și noi, ca și celelalte țări, stăm rău, aș spune, la acest capitol. Statisticile arată că 3 din 4 sau din 5 pacienți care se prezintă la medicul de familie cu o altă problemă suferă și de depresie, ceea ce face această intervenție una foarte necesară. Mi-ar plăcea să fie centre chiar în biserici, locuri în care poate nu te-ai aștepta, în care cei care au nevoie să găsească răspuns la întrebările lor.
Religious leaders could also reduce the stigma around mental disorders by openly accepting the fact that mental disorders exist, and these people require the kind of compassion and the kind of care that all religions are actually accepting for everybody. So mental disorders should not be an exception.
The church needs to be a healing environment. I mean, if there's any place where the person should feel safe, it would be in church. Unfortunately, that's not always the case, because if a person has had some psychological problem, then people in the church hear about it and do things. I mean, one of the things I struggle with the Adventist Church on other churches as well is Alcoholics Anonymous has probably been one of the most successful behavior change programs in the world. Peer review run, not with professionals, but just getting together and helping each other. many churches are reluctant to host AA programs because somehow the stigma and do we want these people in our church and so on. You know, my reaction is what better thing to do? I mean, this is, churches are hospitals for people like this. We ought to be willing to host these programs and try to help people like that. So it is a stigma that we need to overcome and be more open, I think, in terms of accepting the differences among us. I mean, my basic premise is we all have mental disease. You can't see mine, I can't see yours, but I believe we all have different problems that we deal with. And some are more socially acceptable than others, some are less socially acceptable, but we're all in this together and we need to work together on it.
It's very interesting. Jesus dealt with people in his day who were marginalized. They were the outcasts of society, but he reached out in kindness and graciousness and love to them. If anybody needs our support and love, it's those that have mental illness.
Credința în Dumnezeu și apartenența la o comunitate religioasă are de cele mai multe ori un efect benefic asupra stării de sănătate mentală, dar și asupra sănătății fizice.
Researchers have been studying the ways in which religious beliefs and behavior affect health. Now, historically, some scientists have thought of religion in very negative terms and have thought that being religious would be very bad for your health. What we find, there are now more than 2,000 published, very carefully done scientific studies that have looked at the relationship between some type of religious belief or behavior and health. And the overwhelming majority of them find that being religious can be healthy. So for example, the strongest evidence is studies of the relationship between the frequency of attending church or another religious house of worship and how long people live. Most of those studies were done in the United States, but there are many studies from other countries like Australia, there are studies from Europe as well that show a relationship between religion and health. And what we are beginning to understand that there are multiple pathways by which religion affects health. So one of the ways in which religion affects health is through health behaviors. On average, people who are very religious tend to live a healthier lifestyle. They are less likely to smoke, they are less likely to abuse the use of alcohol, they are more likely to eat fruits and vegetables, and along many dimensions, less likely to use drugs. So along many dimensions, religious people tend to be healthier. But it's not just the health behaviors. We know that many people who are religious and go to a religious house of worship, they have friends and contact with other members there. And we now know that social ties and social relationships are very important to health. So one way in which religion affects health then is providing an additional source of social relationships. But very importantly, research also finds that our belief systems affect health. How we make sense of the problems we face in life, how we deal and cope with stress, how we deal with tragedies in our lives also make a difference of the impact that those experiences have on us. And religion can be a positive resource in helping people to face life with a sense of confidence, and for many people, knowing that they are not alone and there is a greater plan to the universe and there is a God who loves them and cares for them and who will help them through all of the difficult challenges that they face, makes an important difference in helping them cope with life.
Faith in God helps us to cope with the disease because it gives us confidence that in spite of that sickness, in spite of that disease, God is there with us. That we have that sense of the divine presence. We have that sense that we're not alone. And I think that makes all the difference. It is not simply that I pray and God will deliver me from the sickness, but it's rather that in that sickness, you know, the Apostle Paul had a problem with his eyesight, and the Bible says that 3 times he prayed that God will remove that thing from him, and God said, "My grace is sufficient for you." So as a Christian going through trauma and difficulty and hardship and sickness, we have that sense that God will never allow us to go through something that he will not strengthen us to go through, and that his grace is sufficient.
In most countries, there are licenses, there's legal boundaries. You can't, I mean, the church can't be passing out antidepressant pills. There's certain things that you can't do without professional involvement. So those boundaries need to be watched. But frankly, particularly in mental illness, and I've talked about depression, probably the biggest mental illness in my view is obesity. People eat because of mental issues. And the church can help all of those. Those don't take medicine. That's a support group. That's all the sort of psychosocial support you need. And the church can well do that. It has to stay out of, or pull in a physician. We have enough professionals that you can pull in a professional to work with the church. But most church groups want to stay out of the legal part of medicine, but deal with the psychosocial issues.
I think it's also important to mention that the research on religion and health finds that there are sometimes religion can have negative effects on health. So for example, research indicates that if you belong to a church or synagogue or religious house of worship, and people there are very supportive and very caring and very positive force in your life, that is good for your health. But if you go to a place where people are very critical of you and make many demands of you and are constantly criticizing you, that has bad effects on health. Also, when we think of what is the content of people's religious beliefs, what do they believe? Research, a lot of it from the United States, shows that people who deal with an illness or coping with cancer by believing that because they got sick, God is punishing them for their sins, or because this problem has occurred in their life, God has abandoned them. People who have, those are religious beliefs, and people who approach religion in that way, those beliefs lead to worse health. So what I'm saying is, most of the research on religion and health indicates religion is a positive force that leads to better health. But we also know that there are ways in which people can use religion that has negative effects on their health as well.
Take guilt, for example. Of all the emotions, guilt is one of the most destructive emotions. Guilt tends to create hypertension. It tends to create major problems with digestion. Guilt can break down the immune system. When we look at faith and God's grace and forgiveness, that is all life-giving. There's one other aspect that I think is important as well, and that's forgiveness. People that have the inability to forgive tend to be resentful. Resentful people tend to trigger negative chemical endorphins that break down the entire immune system. When you come to Christ and you find that He has forgiven you so much, it enables you to forgive other people, and that's health-giving.
Life is full of circumstances that bigger than us. You know, it's very common for us to have problems that to say, what I'm gonna do? I don't know how to handle this. Sometimes it's a sickness, sometimes it's a perplexity, sometimes it's an anguish, an anxiety, a depression. In this case, have confidence in God makes all the difference. Because during our lives, sometimes we go through dark valleys. But if we have faith, we can say, well, I am here, but He is my shepherd, and He will show me the way out. Faith makes all the difference, not only for Christians, but even for agnostics and atheists. Without faith, there's no life. You need faith for everything. Even when you're going to brush your teeth. If you don't have faith that the product, it's good, you're going to say, well, it's going to destroy my teeth. I'm not going to brush it because I need to take it to the laboratory. You need to have faith to do that. Faith to buy the food in the supermarket. Faith that the bus will going to get the end. That the airplane is not going to fall. Faith indispensable for all life. Faith in God is the most basic thing.
Studiul asupra sănătății adventiștilor, inițiat de o echipă de medici de la Universitatea Loma Linda din California, arată legătura puternică între stilul de viață și incidența bolilor civilizației. Studiul a cuprins 96.000 de adventiști din Statele Unite și Canada și a arătat că dieta vegetariană, la fel ca și credința în Dumnezeu, pot asigura o viață lungă, sănătoasă și împlinită.
We found that the Adventists who did about 5 different things. That 1, they were vegetarian, 2, they'd never ever used cigarettes, which we now know is a potent cause of all kinds of ill health. People that ate nuts with some regularity, and we can come back to that. Small quantities of nuts almost every day. People who were careful about their body weight. In other words, they were not too thin, but not overweight. And also people who exercised regularly, several times a week, some vigorous activity. People who did all 5 of those things, as compared to Adventists, and there were a few who did none of them, there was a difference of about 10 years in life expectancy. And in fact, as compared to the non-Adventists in California, where we were doing our studies, the Adventists on average had about a 7-year extra life expectancy for the men and about a 4.5-year life expectancy extra for the woman. So this is a big deal, you know.
I was quite struck by much what I learned at the meeting this morning in terms of the role of the Adventist Church. As I said, when one looks at the academic literature, there are dozens of peer-reviewed articles about research work in cohorts of Adventists. And there's a realization that the lifestyle of Adventists actually is beneficial. So, for example, the type of diet, vegetarian diets, for example, is linked to decreased mortality, lower rates of cardiovascular disease. Adventists live longer than non-Adventists, 7 to 9 years longer. So clearly a lot of things take place. And it's not just simply, I don't think, diet. I think there's also a very strong church community. So there are also the spiritual elements. There's the community support. There's the brotherhood and the fellowship. So I think all of these factors tend to interact with each other to lead to a positive outcome.
So people live longer, but if in fact it's not a happy and good quality life, who would want to do that? And interestingly, the evidence is, and we've looked at this carefully using standardized questionnaire that measure physical quality of life and mental quality of life, and there are published national norms or averages for all of American society. At every age, even up into the older ages where there are more Adventists living, the Adventist quality of life, both physical and mental, is higher than the national norms. So it appears that not only are they living longer, but they're having a better quality of life while they live longer, which is so important.
Este ușor să vorbești despre o viață de calitate când ești sănătos. Ce este de făcut însă când apare o boală cronică? Pot pacienții care luptă tot restul vieții lor cu suferința și sunt dependenți de tratamente să aibă o viață împlinită?
In terms of if one can have a good life with a non-communicable disease for many years, that is indeed possible, and it really comes down to many issues in terms of how much care one invests in oneself with the illness. For example, if one has a condition such as hypertension, reducing salt intake, taking interventions to reduce one's weight, being physically active. These are things that one can do on a day-to-day basis that are beneficial. Taking one's medication, consulting with one's physician, these are all things that one needs to do. So let's say in the case of, for example, diabetes, taking medication, doing the relevant checks of, for example, your feet, going to your physician, having your eyes checked, etc., your cardiovascular examination, checking your blood glucose. These are all part of quality of care that one needs to aspire towards. So certainly, I think with good care, with good, robust primary health care systems that are responsive to the needs of patients, access to universal health coverage so that people have comprehensive quality care without catastrophic expenses in the event of debilitating or complex disease. These are all things that are necessary to ensure that people can have long, productive, high-quality lives.
People with mental disorders can live a happy and fruitful life. They can have a good quality of life. It depends on how severe the mental illness is and what kind of treatment and care and what kind of social integration the society is able to provide. But there is no reason why people with mental disorders have to live an unhappy life. It's just like people with physical illnesses can still have a good quality of life. People with mental disorders are the same. It requires careful treatment, and the treatment is very individualized. Everybody needs a treatment that is suited to him or her, and the optimal level of treatment that needs to be given. That is a great help. And if that can be done, the next step is for society to receive these people and give them acknowledgement, give them empowerment, and give them the kind of proactive facilities and assistance that they need. And if this can be achieved, people with mental disorders, even with chronic mental disorders, can live a life that is having good quality of life and is very rewarding for the person and the family.
How can we still be happy even though we have disease? It's never too late to do lifestyle changes. Does it mean that that chronic disease will go away forever? No, it doesn't. But what it does mean is that what health one enjoys at that point can be maintained a little longer and even improved. Take, for example, a smoker who gives up smoking today, within 24 hours, changes occur in the body which immediately begin to make repairs to the problems of smoking over the time that the person has smoked before. Take an individual who's overweight, has high blood pressure, hasn't been exercising. It's been found that those individuals, it's called metabolic syndrome, that when you take them and you start them on a measured, planned, supervised exercise program, watching their diet, giving them healthful food, within days you can measure in their blood tests how what we call inflammatory markers begin to decrease. There are immediate changes, or almost immediate changes, which begin to take place.
I actually have a relative who's had diabetes for more than 45 years. He tests his blood sugar about 5-6 times a day. He knows what to eat and how much to eat. He's physically active, and having diabetes over 45 years, he basically has no complications. So it is entirely possible, but it takes a lot of effort and collaboration between the individual, family, and healthcare system.
Sometimes we're going to be broken. We're all broken in some or other way, but we can have wholeness in our brokenness as we have a relationship with Jesus, as we live according to the information which He has entrusted to us, be it in health, in our spiritual lives, in our faith life. Some of the people that I've met in my life who have had the most brokenness, severe deforming arthritis, people who've had lost legs, people who have been blind. You may have heard of Helen Keller, Fanny Crosby. Helen Keller was blind, deaf, was taught by someone who had to teach her that, well, that's what water felt like. Fanny Crosby, somebody a doctor prescribed the wrong eye drops when she was a baby, and yet she could write, "Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine." And then she writes, "Visions of rapture burst on my sight," but she was blind. How can you write, "Visions of rapture burst on my sight" when you are blind, unless you can have this wholeness in Jesus?
Sănătatea fizică, psihică, dar și calitatea vieții în ansamblul ei sunt influențate de relațiile familiale bazate pe respect și dragoste. Indiferent de schimbările din societate, femeia și bărbatul trebuie să împlinească voia lui Dumnezeu în viața lor și a căminului.
Marriage was the first institution established by God at creation. And there was a reason He did that. It was God's plan that the family, husband and wife, would create the foundation of the world, of the new society. Father and mother, and subsequently children, would in fact populate the earth and reflect the image of God. It was God's intention that father and mother would work together to build a solid foundation of security, of teaching the next generation how to live so that they could give honor and glory to God. As you know, it's God's plan that all of us live in happiness, in relationship with Him. The family is a socializing factor in that it teaches values, it teaches children about God, it teaches children about healthy living, it teaches children about what to eat, what to do, how to behave, according to the principles in God's Word. So that was God's plan from the very beginning, to use father and mother as a safe environment where children can feel the nurture of parents, learn about God, and learn about what God wanted for them to do so they would be happy, healthy, and be able to reflect His image.
For children, we educate our children first in the home. And education begins in the family. We see now a lot of scientific literature saying that the family is the place that nurtures children, that's where children first learn their behaviors, they learn good manners, they learn, they get a better understanding of their world. And Ellen White said that a very long time ago, that the home is the first school. And it's that family circle that's going to educate our children. And so we have to make sure that from birth, we are training our children in the way we want them to go. Isn't that what the Bible says? Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. And really what that means is that if we really want to see our children in the kingdom, they may not do everything exactly the way that we want them to, but we're giving them values. We're providing a foundation for them. And what we know about children that is most important for them is a safe environment. So that's their first education, where they learn how to trust. If they can trust the adults in their life, we give them security. It's almost like medicine. Because when we give our children this secure home environment where they learn how to trust, where they learn how to love God, when they go out into the world, it makes it that much easier for them to learn academically, to develop better, and even for their spiritual development.
It's a very challenging time in which we live today. The reality is, ever since sin came into the world, life became more difficult. God had a perfect plan. He created a man and a woman so that they would nurture a family. Today, we're dealing with the brokenness of sin, the reality of sin. Two things we need to always be mindful of when it comes to family. One, God has an ideal. But two, God has a redemptive plan. The ideal is no sin. Live sinless, perfect lives as God had planned. But now that we have sinned, what do we do? Here's the reality. The Bible is still the guide for people, for Christians, to live according to God's standards. When we follow God's word of loving one another as He has loved us, of being patient, of being kind, this is still the place where we learn, where we teach, where we model for children to know what good relationships are about. Is it easy? No, it's not easy. We all have inherited bad tendencies from our families of origin. But God has still power. God has a plan. God still wants to redeem the family today.
The role of women have changed quite a bit in the last few decades. Today we live in a society, even in traditional societies, where many women are working outside the home. They are having to be really assisting their husbands to bring those resources for the family. And so it places a lot of burden and a lot of pressure in the lives of women who have to be the wives, the moms, the daughters, and also the professionals, besides doing their volunteer work, in service and ministry.
What I like to say is that it really shouldn't change our role as godly women. That God has intended for us as women to provide a certain responsibility, a certain role in the household, whether there's a father there or not, whether we're working outside of the home or inside of the home. We still have a role as sort of being the background of the backbone of the family. We keep the family together as women, and there's nothing that's going to change that. And sometimes I think as women, we feel, even though I understand that it's challenging because I've done it, where I've worked outside and still come home, and those things are difficult, and we've got to figure out how to work that out better between husbands and wives. But I think as women, we really need to begin to understand what God intends for us and what his purpose is for us as women. We're not men. We're women. And so we have a certain nurturing. You know, we're created in God's image, just like men are. And God has a side of himself that's very motherly. He cares for his flock. He loves his children. And that's the role of women, that we care for our family, we care for our children. We provide a certain stability in the household that can only be provided by us as women. So we need to take that very seriously. Ellen White says that we are supposed to be the queen of the homes, that we have a high and holy calling as women of God. And I think more of us as women, if we take that more seriously, then we can come into an understanding of what God intends for us as Christian women and mothers.
What does he say? He says, with me you can do all things. What else does he say? He says, I will be with you always. In the book of Matthew, chapter 28 and verse 20, I'll be with you always. What does he say in the book of John, chapter 14 and verse 27? Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. And then in the book of Philippians, chapter 4 and verse 19, he says, my God will supply all of your needs. In the book of James, chapter 1 and verse 19, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to be angry. The Bible is still filled with all kinds of information for family living. In the book of 1 Corinthians 13, it says, love is patient, love is kind. So, even though we live in a broken world, even though it's difficult, even though we're sinful, even though we make mistakes, it also says, forgive one another as I have forgiven you. So God is saying that if we are going to live in a family that is functional in this dysfunctional world, the closer we pay attention to what the Bible says, the way that we study, the way we have family worship, so we can socialize our children to learn about God, to know about his love, to know about his forgiveness, to know about his power, we recognize that despite the brokenness, despite all the voices that we're hearing that are leading us the wrong way, God still speaks to us through his word. He still has clear directives. Do unto others as you'll have them do unto you. So the Bible has all kinds of relationship directives. Live at peace with everyone. These are all Bible texts. Yes, we could talk from psychology or family sociology, but all those principles are in the Word of God. If we follow them, if we talk about them, our families will be stronger and healthier. And through the power of God, we can still reflect his image. We can still forgive our brokenness, and we can live lives that give honor and glory to him and build up the society where we are. Because when we have strong marriages, we have strong families, and we have strong communities and strong countries.
Este posibil ca pe această lume plină de suferință morală, de boală și durere, să avem o viață împlinită? Deși problemele nu pot fi întotdeauna evitate, credința că Dumnezeu ne cunoaște și are un plan pentru fiecare dintre noi ne dă putere să facem față dificultăților.
The health message is mainly a preventative message. Eating right, exercising, drinking water, resting. All of us, if Jesus tarries, are going to die. It'll be from cancer or heart disease or something. But in the meantime, we can be whole in our brokenness.
We've learned many things here. But perhaps the main message is that a loving God has given us a pattern or a way to care for our bodies and for our minds and for our families, our friends. And so, first of all, I think we need to realize that we need these. that I want something better. I'm not happy with the way I'm living my life. I want something better. I want to be healthier. I want to feel good. I want to have less physical problems. And that realization has to come to each one of us as attendees of this conference. And then to go out and share it with others in a very sensitive manner, in a way that does not judge others, but tell others, look, I feel better. I've gained this, and I want to put it into practice in my own life. And then to share it with others, to have more compassion, to have more knowledge to tell people how they could avoid, for example, getting sick with diabetes or with cancer. How they can deal with their family problems, how they can deal with their community problems, to be role models and to play a stronger role in bringing the ministry of healing of Jesus into their families, into their communities.
What I'm really asking and pleading for is that we don't think that by using our knives and forks appropriately, we're going to live forever on this earth, and that we'll never get sickness, or that we'll be able to overcome the difficulty of the genetics which were dealt out beyond our control. But even when comes the time the diagnosis is not going to be good, He has promised, I will never leave you, I will never forsake you.